The cold metal halls of the ancient space station echoed with the footsteps of Commander Zara Velton. Her blue skin gleamed under the dim emergency lights as she led her team through the wreckage. This place had been floating in space for over 300 years, silent and dead like everything else from the human. Homeworld. Zara stopped at a massive door that still bore the faded letters Defense Command Center. Her scanner beeped softly in the quiet. Beyond this door lay secrets that might save her people or destroy them all. The Zephyrian Collective was dying. For 50 years, they had fought the Void Swarm across the galaxy. The enemy was like nothing they had ever seen before. They consumed entire worlds, turning planets into lifeless rocks. They never talked, never showed mercy, never stopped coming. Every battle ended the same way. The Collective would retreat, and another world would fall. Zara's own homeworld was gone now. She remembered the day the evacuation ships left Zephyr Minor, carrying what few survivors they could save. Her family had been among those left behind. The memory still hurt, even after all these years. "Commander, we're reading massive power signatures beyond this door," said Lieutenant Kex, her second in command. His tentacles moved nervously as he studied his instruments. "The readings are unlike anything in our database." Zara nodded. They had come here looking for weapons, for technology, for anything that might help them win this war. The humans had fought the swarm once before, right here in this system. They had lost, but they had made the enemy pay a terrible price. Perhaps something of their strength remained. The door groaned as their tools finally forced it open. Cold air rushed out, carrying with it the scent of metal and something else. Something organic. Emergency lights flickered on automatically, revealing a sight that made Zara's breath catch in her throat. The room was huge, filled with rows upon rows of gleaming cylinders. Each one was the size of a small room, covered in ice and connected to humming machines. Through the frost on the glass, she could see shapes inside, human shapes. "By the 7 moons," whispered Dr. Keth Morvain as he stepped forward. The old scientist's eyes were wide with wonder and fear. "They're preserved, perfectly preserved." Zara moved closer to one of the cylinders. Inside, she could see a human male, tall and broad-shouldered even in death. His face was peaceful, as if he were merely sleeping. A nameplate on the cylinder. Read Captain Jake Morrison, 3rd Marine Division. "How many are there?" Zara asked. "Preliminary scans show over 200 cylinders," Kex replied. "But, Commander, most of them show signs of system failure. Only about a dozen still have full power." Dr. Morvain was already connecting his equipment to the nearest cylinder. "The technology is incredible. These preservation systems are centuries ahead of anything we have. The humans must have put their best warriors in here before the final battle." Zara studied the sleeping face of Captain Morrison. She had read the human military records they had found in other ruins. This man had fought in dozens of battles across human space. He had never retreated, never surrendered, even when the odds were hopeless. The humans called people like him heroes. Can they be revived? She asked. The doctor's instruments beeped and flashed as he worked. "The cellular damage is minimal. Their brains show no signs of decay. It's possible, but it would require massive amounts of energy and medical resources. And even if we succeed, we don't know what condition they would be in after 3 centuries. Zara looked around the room at all the sleeping warriors. These were humanity's finest soldiers, preserved in their final hour. They had died defending their world against the same enemy that now threatened all life in the galaxy. Perhaps they held the key to victory. "There's something else, Commander," Dr. Morvain said quietly. "The preservation process appears to have enhanced their cellular structure. If revived, These humans might be stronger and faster than they were in life. Lieutenant Kex moved nervously behind them. Commander, with respect, this is dangerous. The humans were a violent species. Their history is filled with wars and conflicts. If we bring them back, how do we know they won't turn on us? Zara understood his concern. The collective had studied human culture extensively after discovering Earth's ruins. Humans had spent most of their history fighting each other over resources, territory, and ideas. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their own planet multiple times over. They were everything the peaceful collective was not, but they had also done something the collective had never managed. When faced with extinction, they had fought back with everything they had. They had made the swarm bleed for every inch of ground. Even in defeat, they had inspired fear in an enemy that knew no emotion. Dr. Morvain, what are the chances of successful revival? Zara asked. For this one, perhaps 70%. The others with intact systems might have lower chances, but it's possible. Zara made her decision. Begin the revival process for Captain Morrison. If it works, we'll consider the others. Commander, the Collective Council will not approve this, Kex warned. They fear human aggression almost as much as they fear the swarm. Then we won't tell them until it's done, Zara replied. The swarm destroyed the Altair colonies last week. 6 billion dead in 3 days. We're losing this war, Kex. We need something different, something the enemy doesn't expect. Dr. Morvain began connecting power cables to Morrison's cylinder. The revival process will take 12 hours. I'll need to monitor every stage carefully. If something goes wrong, we could lose him permanently. As the machines hummed to life around them, Zara wondered if she was making the right choice. They were about to bring back a warrior from a dead race, a soldier trained for a war that ended centuries ago. Would he help them, or would he see them as enemies? The ice began to melt from Morrison's cylinder as warmth flowed through the preservation system. For the first time in 300 years, color returned to his skin. His chest began to rise and fall slowly as ancient lungs remembered how to breathe. Zara watched in fascination as the greatest gamble in galactic history began. In a few hours, they would either have a powerful ally or a dangerous enemy. But one thing was certain. The war against the Void Swarm was about to change forever. The first thing Captain Jake Morrison felt was cold. Deep, bone-cutting cold that seemed to reach into his very soul. Then came the pain, sharp needles of fire running through every muscle in his body. His eyes snapped open to see strange blue. Faces staring down at him, Dot Morrison tried to speak, but only managed a harsh croak. His throat felt like sandpaper. One of the blue-skinned creatures held a cup of water to his lips. The liquid was sweet and cool, nothing like the recycled water he remembered from the defense stations. Easy, Captain Morrison, said a gentle voice. The speaker was tall and thin, with large dark eyes and skin that seemed to shimmer in the light. You have been asleep for a very long time. Memory came flooding back. The swarm ships darkening. The sky. The final evacuation order. The choice to stay behind and buy time for the civilian transports. He remembered climbing into the preservation chamber as the enemy closed in on Earth's last orbital fortress. How long? Morrison asked, his voice getting stronger. 312 years, replied the alien. I am Commander Zara Valtan of the Zephyrian Collective. You are aboard our research vessel, the New Dawn. Morrison sat up slowly, his head spinning. 300 years. Everyone he had ever known was dead. His family, his friends, his entire species. The weight of that knowledge hit him like a physical blow. Earth? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Gone, Zara said softly. The swarm consumed it shortly after your preservation. We found your station drifting in the ruins of your solar system. Morrison closed his eyes for a moment, letting the grief wash over him. Then he pushed it down, buried it deep where it couldn't interfere with what needed to be done. He was a soldier. Soldiers dealt with loss by completing the mission. "Why did you wake me up?" he asked. "Because we need your help," Zara replied. "The same enemy that destroyed your world is destroying ours. We have been fighting them for 50 years and losing. We hoped that human military knowledge might give us an advantage." Morrison looked around the medical bay. Through a window, he could see strange stars and unfamiliar patterns. He was truly alone now, the last human in a galaxy full of aliens. But these aliens needed him, and that gave him purpose. Over the next few days, Morrison learned about the Collective and their war against the Void Swarm. He was amazed by their technology. Their ships could travel between stars in days, rather than months. Their weapons could destroy entire asteroids. Their medical systems had brought him back from the dead, but their military tactics were defensive and cautious. They fought to minimize casualties and preserve life. When they lost a battle, they retreated to save their forces. They had never won a major victory against the swarm in decades of fighting. "You have all this advanced technology," Morrison said during one of his briefings with Zara. "Why aren't you winning?" "The swarm adapts to our weapons and tactics," she explained. "They learn from each encounter and become stronger. Our peaceful nature works against us in this war." Morrison studied the battle reports and tactical analyses. The pattern was clear. The Collective fought like they were playing a game with rules. The swarm fought like a force of nature, consuming everything in their path. "I want to see the other preservation chambers," Morrison said. Zara led him back to the storage bay where the other cylinders waited. Morrison walked among them, reading the nameplates. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, fighter pilot with over 200 combat missions. Sergeant Ryan Kelly, demolitions expert who had held the Titan mining stations against impossible odds. Colonel Lisa Barnes, the tactical genius who had designed Earth's final defense strategy. "Can you revive them?" Morrison asked. Dr. Morvain believes so, but the Collective Council is hesitant. They fear that too many human soldiers might upset the balance of our alliance. Morrison understood their concern. Humans had a reputation for violence and aggression. But right now, that was exactly what the galaxy needed. "Start with Rodriguez and Kelly," he said. "Barnes can wait until you're more comfortable with us." The revival process for Amy Rodriguez took 18 hours. Morrison stayed by her cylinder the entire time, watching as color slowly returned to her face. When her eyes finally opened, the first thing she saw was Morrison's familiar smile. "Jake?" she whispered. "Did we win?" "Not yet," Morrison replied. "But we're going to." Rodriguez wept when she learned about Earth's fate. Morrison held her as she grieved for their lost world and everyone they had left behind. But like him, she was a soldier. When the tears stopped, she was ready to fight. Ryan Kelly's revival was more difficult. The big sergeant came up swinging, thinking he was still under attack. It took both Morrison and Rodriguez to calm him down and explain the situation. When he finally understood, Kelly just nodded grimly. "So we're the last humans in the galaxy," he said. "And these blue folks need us to help them fight the same bastards who killed our world." "That's about the size of it," Morrison agreed. Kelly cracked his knuckles and grinned. "Well then, let's get to work." The three humans spent the next weeks learning about collective technology and tactics. They studied swarm behavior patterns and analyzed battle reports. More importantly, they began teaching the alien soldiers new approaches to warfare. Morrison showed them how to use terrain to their advantage, how to set ambush and create kill zones. Rodriguez taught their pilots aggressive maneuvering techniques and close-quarters combat tactics. Kelly introduced them to the concept of improvised explosives and guerrilla warfare. Collective soldiers were initially shocked by human methods. Where they saw destruction, humans saw opportunity. Where they saw casualties, humans saw acceptable losses for greater strategic gains. It was a completely different way of thinking about war. But slowly, some of the younger collective officers began to understand. They started asking questions about human military history and tactics. They wanted to learn how a species could fight so fiercely for so long without giving up hope. Commander Zara watched it all with growing interest and concern. The humans were exactly what her people needed to win this war. But they were also changing the very nature of the collective's military forces. She wondered if victory would be worth the price of becoming something they had never been before. As Morrison stood on the observation deck looking out at the stars, he felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He and his team were not just soldiers anymore. They were the last representatives of humanity, carrying the hopes and dreams of an extinct species. They had to win this war, not just for the collective, but for the memory of everyone they had lost. The galaxy would learn what it meant to fight like a human. The warning sirens screamed through the corridors of New Haven Station as emergency lights bathed everything in red. Captain Morrison ran toward the command center, his boots pounding against the metal floor. Behind him, Rodriguez and Kelly followed, their faces grim with determination. "Report," Morrison called out as he entered the bustling command center. Commander Zara turned from the main display screen, her blue skin pale with worry. "The swarm has launched a massive attack on the Kepler system. 3 hive ships and over 50 smaller vessels. They'll reach the inhabited planets in 6 hours. Morrison studied the tactical display. The Kepler system had 3 worlds with large populations. Over 2 billion people lived there, mostly peaceful farmers and miners. The standard collective response would be to evacuate as many as possible while conducting a fighting retreat. "What's the evacuation plan?" Morrison asked. "We can save perhaps 30% of the population if we're lucky," Zara replied. "The rest will have to be left behind. We don't have enough ships or time." Morrison felt anger rising in his chest. 30%. That meant over 1 billion people would die while the collective ran away again. He looked at Rodriguez and Kelly, seeing the same fury in their eyes. "There's another way," Morrison said quietly. "What do you mean?" asked General Leck, the collective's military commander. His forearms gestured nervously as he spoke. "We cannot fight 3 hive ships with our current forces. We don't fight them head-on," Morrison explained. "We make them pay for every inch of ground they take. We turn the system into a trap." The alien officers looked confused. Lieutenant Kex stepped forward, his tentacles waving uncertainly. "Captain Morrison, our doctrine has always been to preserve life above all else. We cannot sacrifice entire fleets in hopeless battles." "It's not hopeless if we're smart about it," Rodriguez said, moving to the tactical display. "Look at the asteroid field between the 4th and 5th planets. Perfect place for an ambush." Kelly pointed to the mining stations scattered throughout the system. All those facilities have fusion reactors. With the right modifications, they become very big bombs. Morrison began outlining his plan. Instead of running immediately, they would set traps throughout the system. The mining stations would be rigged with explosives and left as bait. The asteroid field would hide squadrons of fighters waiting to strike. Most importantly, they would make the swarm think they were retreating, while actually drawing them into carefully prepared kill zones. "This is madness," General Leck protested. "You're asking us to sacrifice entire wings of fighters and multiple capital ships." "I'm asking you to make those losses count for something," Morrison replied. "Every swarm ship we destroy here is one less ship attacking somewhere else." Every day we delay them is another day for evacuations across the galaxy. Commander Zara studied the plan carefully. It was unlike anything the collective had ever attempted. It relied on aggression, deception, and acceptable losses. Everything their culture stood against. But it might actually work. How many people can we save with this plan? She asked. 60%, maybe 70% if we're lucky, Morrison said. But we'll lose ships and pilots. We lose ships and pilots anyway, Rodriguez added. At least this way, their deaths mean something. After hours of debate, Zara made the decision. They would try Morrison's plan. The collective fleet began moving into position, with human advisors assigned to each ship to help implement the new tactics. Lieutenant Rodriguez took command of Fighter Squadron 7, a mixed unit of human and alien pilots. She had spent weeks training them in aggressive combat maneuvers, teaching them to think like predators rather than prey. Remember, she told her pilots over the radio, we're not here to have a fair fight. We're here to kill as many of them as possible and get out alive. Stay low, use the asteroids for cover, and hit them when they're not expecting it. Sergeant Kelly worked with the engineering teams to modify the mining stations. Each facility became a massive bomb, designed to look like it was still operational until the moment of detonation. Hidden sensors would trigger the explosions when swarm ships came too close. Morrison coordinated the overall battle from the command ship, working closely with Zara and her staff. For the first time in decades, collective forces were taking the offensive, and it felt strange to everyone involved. The swarm arrived exactly on schedule, their dark ships moving in perfect formation toward the inhabited worlds. They had done this countless times before, and they expected the same result. The defenders would retreat, saving a few while abandoning the many. But this time was different. The first trap was sprung when the swarm's advanced scouts investigated what appeared to be an abandoned mining station. Kelly's explosives turned the facility into a miniature sun, destroying 4 enemy ships in the blast. The swarm barely had time to process what had happened before the second station exploded. Then the third. Rodriguez led her fighters out of the asteroid field like avenging angels, striking at the confused swarm formations with precision and fury. Her pilots had learned well, using hit-and-run tactics that kept the enemy off balance and constantly guessing. Target their communication arrays, Rodriguez ordered over the radio. Make them deaf and blind. The collective's larger ships, positioned behind the gas giant's moons, emerged at precisely the right moment to catch the swarm forces divided and disorganized. For the first time in anyone's memory, it was the swarm that was retreating, but victory came at a price. Squadron Leader Vex died when his fighter rammed a hive ship's engine core. Captain Null's destroyer was lost with all hands defending a civilian transport. Dozens of brave pilots never made it home. When the battle ended, the final count showed unprecedented success. The collective had destroyed over half the attacking swarm force and saved nearly 70% of the civilian population. It was the first major victory against the swarm in 50 years. In the aftermath, Morrison found himself surrounded by alien officers who looked at him with a mixture of respect and fear. They had won, but at the cost of becoming something they had never been before: warriors. The swarm will adapt to these tactics, General Vec warned. They learn from every encounter. Then we'll adapt too, Morrison replied. The difference is, we can think creatively. They can only follow their programming. Commander Zara stood at the viewing port, watching the evacuation ships carry survivors to safety. More people were alive today because of human military tactics. But she wondered what other changes would come as the war continued. The news of the victory spread quickly through collective space. For the first time in decades, there was hope. The swarm could be beaten. The humans had shown them how not, but in the depths of space, the surviving swarm ships sent their reports back to the hive mind. The enemy had changed tactics. New adaptations would be required. The war was entering a new phase, and both sides would have to evolve to survive. Morrison looked out at the stars and thought of Earth. His world was gone, but its children were still fighting. The galaxy would learn what humanity could accomplish when backed into a corner with nothing left to lose. News of the victory at Kepler spread across the galaxy like wildfire. For the first time in 50 years, the collective had dealt a crushing blow to the Void Swarm. Refugee camps erupted in celebration, and military recruitment stations saw lines of volunteers stretching for blocks. Captain Morrison stood in the center of what had once been New Haven's cargo bay. Now it served as the training ground for the newly established Terran Combat Academy. Dozens of alien soldiers from 12 different species practiced human fighting techniques under the watchful eyes of the revived human warriors. Keep your weapons moving, Morrison called out to a group of Centaurian soldiers. The moment you stop, you become a target. Flow like water, strike like lightning. The tall, insect-like Centaurians clicked their mandibles in acknowledgement. Their arms working to master the human concept of continuous motion in combat. It was difficult for them to abandon their natural tendency to fight in rigid formations. Across the training floor, Lieutenant Rodriguez worked with a squadron of Altarian pilots. The psychic species had trouble with human aerial combat tactics because they instinctively tried to sense their opponent's intentions. Rodriguez was teaching them to ignore their psychic abilities and rely on pure aggression and unpredictability. "Stop thinking so much," Rodriguez shouted over the noise of the simulators. "In a real dogfight, there's no time for telepathy. You see an opening, you take it. You see a threat, you eliminate it. Trust your instincts, not your mind." Sergeant Kelly had gathered a mixed group of engineers and soldiers around a table covered with improvised explosive devices. His specialty had become increasingly valuable as the war evolved. The swarm adapted quickly to conventional weapons, but they struggled to understand human creativity in destruction. The beauty of improvised explosives is that they're always different, Kelly explained, holding up a device made from spare reactor parts and mining equipment. The swarm can't adapt to something they've never seen before. Every bomb is unique. Every trap is a surprise. The success at Kepler had convinced the Collective Council to approve the revival of more human soldiers. Colonel Lisa Barnes emerged from her preservation chamber 3 weeks after the battle, her sharp mind immediately grasping the strategic situation. Within days, she had been appointed as the Collective's new Strategic Operations Commander. Barnes brought with her a level of tactical thinking that even Morrison found impressive. Where he saw individual battles, she saw entire campaigns. Where others planned for single engagements, she designed strategies that spanned multiple star systems and months of warfare. The swarm's greatest strength is also their greatest weakness, Barnes explained during a high-level strategy meeting. They operate as a single mind across vast distances. If we can disrupt their communication networks, we can turn their coordination against them. Commander Zara listened intently as Barnes outlined her plan. Instead of simply fighting defensive actions, they would launch coordinated strikes across multiple systems simultaneously. The goal was not just to win individual battles, but to force the swarm to split their attention and resources. This level of coordination has never been attempted before, General Leck warned. The logistics alone would be staggering. That's exactly why it will work, Barnes replied. The swarm won't expect it because no one has ever tried it. We'll hit them everywhere at once, and when they try to respond, we'll already be gone. The plan required perfect timing and communication between dozens of fleets scattered across the galaxy. It was ambitious, beyond anything the Collective had ever attempted. But the humans had given them something they had lost long ago, the confidence to take risks. More human soldiers were discovered in the ruins of other Earth defense stations. Major Chris Thompson, a specialist in urban warfare, was found in the wreckage of Luna Base. Captain Sue Anderson, an expert in naval tactics, was recovered from a destroyed space dock near Mars. Lieutenant Ben Foster, whose knowledge of electronic warfare was legendary, was found in a research facility orbiting Jupiter. Each new revival brought additional expertise and perspective to the growing human contingent, but it also brought challenges. Some of the revived soldiers struggled with the reality of their situation. They were the last of their kind, fighting for people they had once considered enemies, in a war that had already claimed their entire civilization. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a combat medic found in a field hospital on Titan, refused to speak for weeks after her revival. When she finally broke her silence, it was to ask a single question: what's the point of saving everyone else when we couldn't save ourselves? Morrison found her in the observation lounge, staring out at the stars. He understood her pain because he felt it too. Every human soldier carried the weight of their species' extinction, and it threatened to crush them if they let it. "We save them because that's what soldiers do," Morrison said quietly. "We protect those who can't protect themselves. It doesn't matter if they're human or alien. Life is life." Mitchell turned to look at him, tears streaming down her face. "But Earth is gone, Jake. Everyone we ever knew is dead. What are we fighting for?" "We're fighting so that what happened to Earth never happens again," Morrison replied. "We're fighting to make sure the galaxy remembers that humanity never gave up, even at the very end." The campaigns that followed became known as the Lightning Wars. Human-trained collective forces struck at swarm positions across 17 star systems in perfect coordination. The enemy, used to fighting single battles, suddenly found themselves under attack everywhere. At once, Doc Rodriguez led the assault on the Vega system, her mixed squadron of human and alien pilots, overwhelming the swarm's orbital defenses in minutes rather than hours. Kelly's sabotage teams infiltrated swarm-held mining facilities throughout the Proxima sector, turning the enemy's own resources into weapons against them. Barnes coordinated it all from New Haven, her tactical genius evident in every move. She anticipated the swarm's responses and had counter-moves ready before the enemy even knew they were under attack. For the first time since the war began, it was the collective that held the initiative. The victories kept coming. The liberation of Vega Station saw 3 hive ships destroyed with minimal collective losses. The ambush at Proxima Gate resulted in the capture of intact swarm technology for the first time. The defense of the Centauri colonies proved that human tactics could work even when the enemy knew they were coming. But success came with its own problems. Some collective leaders worried that their military was becoming too aggressive, too willing to accept casualties for strategic gains. The human influence was changing more than just tactics. It was changing the very nature of their society. "We're becoming like them," warned Council Member VX during a heated debate. "The humans are turning us into warriors, and warriors inevitably become conquerors." Commander Zara found herself caught between 2 philosophies. The human way of war was effective, but it went against everything the collective had believed in for centuries. They were winning battles, but at the cost of losing themselves. Morrison sensed the growing tension during a strategy meeting. He could see the fear in some of the alien officers' eyes, not fear of the swarm, but fear of what they themselves were becoming. "You think we're making you into monsters," Morrison said quietly, "but that's not what's happening here. We're teaching you to be survivors. There's a difference, is there?" asked General Vec. "Every day we become more willing to sacrifice lives for victory. How long before we're no different from the enemy we're fighting?" Morrison considered the question carefully. It was one that had haunted humanity throughout their history. How Much could you change and still remain yourself? The difference is choice, he finally said. We choose to fight because the alternative is extinction. The swarm fights because it's all they know how to do. As long as we remember why we're fighting, we'll never become them. As the war continued, both sides adapted and evolved. The swarm developed new tactics to counter human strategies, while the humans found ways to stay one step ahead. It was a deadly dance of innovation and counter-innovation, with the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance. But for the first time since the war began, the collective was winning. And that changed everything. The emergency meeting had been called at 3 a.m, station time. General Morrison, now wearing the stars of his new rank, stood before the holographic display showing the most terrifying sight the galaxy had ever seen. A massive swarm, fleet larger than anything previously encountered, was moving toward Zephyr Prime, the heart of the collective. Preliminary counts show over 300 hive ships, reported Colonel Barnes, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the threat. They're converging from 7 different directions. Estimated arrival time is 6 days. Commander Zara felt her blood turn cold. Zephyr Prime was home to over 50 billion souls from 12 different species. It was the center of collective, government, culture, and military command. If it fell, the war was over. Traditional defensive strategies would require us to abandon the outer colonies and concentrate our forces here, General Vex said, his 4 arms gesturing at the tactical display. Even then, our chances of success are minimal. Morrison studied the display with the eyes of a man who had spent his entire life preparing for impossible battles. The swarm had learned from their defeats and adapted their strategy. They were no longer attacking piecemeal, but committing everything to one massive assault. There's another option, Morrison said quietly. What do you mean? Asked Zara, though she already suspected what he was thinking. We go after their brain, Morrison replied. Intelligence reports show the swarm's central command structure is located in the Void Nebula, 3 systems away. We hit that, and the entire fleet becomes nothing more than mindless drones. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Void Nebula was deep in swarm territory, surrounded by defensive positions that had never been breached. It would be a suicide mission. The casualties would be enormous, Dr. Morvain said, his voice shaking. We'd be sending thousands of people to their deaths. We'll be sending thousands to their deaths anyway, if we fight defensively, Lieutenant Rodriguez countered. At least this way, their sacrifice means something. Colonel Barnes activated another holographic display, showing the swarm's command. Structure. The central hive complex is enormous, larger than most space stations. It coordinates the entire swarm across the galaxy. If we can destroy it, every swarm ship becomes isolated and vulnerable. Sergeant Kelly leaned forward, studying the tactical data. The approach is going to be hell. They've got defensive positions throughout the nebula, sensor nets, automated weapon platforms. We'll lose half our forces before we even reach the target. Then we don't go in with half measures, Morrison said. We take everything we have. Every ship, every pilot, every soldier. We make one final push and end this war once and for all. The debate that followed was intense and emotional. Some collective leaders argued for the traditional defensive strategy, while others supported Morrison's audacious plan. In the end, it was Commander Zara who made the decision. We've spent 50 years fighting defensively and losing, she said. The humans have shown us that sometimes the only way to win is to risk everything. I'm authorizing Operation Final Strike. The next 5 days were a whirlwind of preparation. Every available ship was retrofitted for the assault. Pilots who had never worked together trained side by side. Engineers modified weapons and shields for maximum effectiveness. The entire collective war machine focused on one goal: Reaching the swarm's heart and destroying it, Morrison found himself saying goodbye to people he had come to consider family. Dr. Morvain, who had brought him back from the dead. Lieutenant Kex, who had overcome his fear of human aggression to become an effective warrior. Even General Vec, who had learned to respect human tactical thinking despite his reservations. If we don't make it back, Morrison told Zara, make sure the GalaXY remembers what happened here. Don't let them forget that people of all species can stand together when it matters. The assault fleet consisted of over 800 ships, the largest force the collective had ever assembled. Human and alien crews worked together as never before, united by a common purpose and trained in the aggressive tactics that had become their trademark. Lieutenant Rodriguez led the first wave, her fighter squadron screaming through the nebula's outer defenses. The automated weapons platforms opened fire, filling space with deadly energy beams, but the pilots had learned to think like humans. They dodged and weaved, used the nebula's gas clouds for cover, and struck back with precision and fury. First, defensive line is breached, Rodriguez reported over the radio, proceeding to target Alpha. Sergeant Kelly's sabotage teams had infiltrated the nebula days earlier, using captured swarm technology to blend in with the enemy forces. As the main assault began, his explosives began detonating throughout the defensive network, creating chaos and confusion. Colonel Barnes coordinated the overall attack from the command ship, her tactical genius evident in every move. She had anticipated the swarm's responses and prepared counters for their counters. But even she knew that success was far from guaranteed. The central hive complex was even more massive than the intelligence reports had suggested. It stretched for kilometers in every direction, a living structure that pulsed with malevolent intelligence. This was the brain of the swarm, the controlling force behind 50 years of galactic destruction. All units, this is General Morrison, came the voice over the radio. We're going in. Remember, we're not just fighting for the collective. We're fighting for every species that has ever existed, every world that has ever been home to someone. Make it count. The final assault was a nightmare of fire and metal. Swarm defenders swarmed out of hidden positions, their ships like angry insects protecting their hive. The collective forces pushed forward, taking terrible losses, but never slowing down. Rodriguez's squadron broke through the outer defenses, but her fighter took a direct hit from a hive ship's main gun. Her last transmission was a cry of defiance. For Earth, for humanity, for everyone we couldn't save. Kelly's team reached the hive complex's power core, but the swarm's defenses were too strong. The sergeant made a final decision, manually detonating his entire explosive payload. The blast tore through the structure's support systems, causing massive secondary explosions. Colonel Barnes coordinated the assault even as her command ship was overrun by swarm boarding parties. Her final order was simple. All remaining units, target the central command node. Don't let our sacrifice be in vain. General Morrison led the final assault team into the heart of the hive complex. The corridors were filled with swarm warriors, but the human soldiers had learned to fight like their ancestors. They pushed forward through overwhelming odds, driven by the knowledge that failure meant the end. Of all free life in the GalaXY, the central command chamber was a vast space filled with pulsing organic technology. At its center sat the swarms, controlling intelligence, a massive creature that had directed the destruction of countless worlds. When it spoke, its voice was like the sound of dying stars. You cannot stop what we are, it said. We are inevitable. We are eternal. We are death itself. Morrison raised his weapon, thinking of Earth, of his fallen comrades, of all the people depending on him. Maybe, he said, but we're human, and humans don't know when to quit. The explosion that followed could be seen from 3 star systems away. The hive complex tore itself apart as its controlling intelligence died, sending shockwaves through the swarm's collective consciousness. Across the galaxy, swarm ships suddenly stopped moving, their crews confused and directionless. The war was over. The collective had won. But the victory came at a terrible price. Most of the human soldiers were dead, including Morrison himself. They had saved the galaxy by sacrificing everything they had left in the aftermath. As the collective began rebuilding and the swarm remnants were hunted down, memorials were erected to honor the fallen. The largest was on Zephyr Prime, where a statue of General Morrison stood alongside representations of all the species that had fought together. The inscription read, "They were the last of their kind, but they were not alone." In their final hour, they found family among the stars, and their sacrifice ensured that no world would ever stand alone again. Commander Zara, now promoted to Admiral, stood before the memorial on the first anniversary of the victory. The galaxy was at peace, but she knew it had been bought with the blood of heroes. The humans had taught them that sometimes the only way to preserve life was to be willing to sacrifice it. The Terran Combat Academy still operated, now staffed by alien instructors who had learned from the masters. Human tactics and philosophy were taught to every officer in the collective military. The galaxy would never forget the lessons learned from humanity's last warriors. As Zara looked up at the stars, she whispered a promise to the dead. "We'll remember. We'll never let the galaxy forget what you taught us. And we'll make sure that no species ever has to stand alone against the darkness again." The humans were gone, but their legacy lived on in every world they had helped save, in every life they had protected, and in the courage they had shown when all seemed lost. They had proven that even in the face of extinction, the human spirit could never be broken. And in the depths of space, where new threats might one day emerge, that spirit would be waiting, carried forward by the countless species who